Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. I'm Reed Price. I'm the director of the center, and I'm happy that we are hosting Paul Merriman today. This is a tough time to be thinking about retirement just because there's so much uncertainty. But as Paul often says, I think you have to account for uncertainty in your planning anyway. Paul created the Merriman Financial Education Foundation after many years as a financial advisor and wealth management advisor, and he is now sharing his expertise with us as a nonprofit foundation lead, and we really appreciate that. I want to thank also Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which sponsors our regular programming here on Something to Talk About. They offer independent living and assisted living and memory care up on Rolling Bay. They also have day stay and respite care programs. If you'd like to learn more, call Celia or Jamie, and their phone number is 206 594 1010. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish people who have lived on the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We honor them and are learning from their stewardship of these lands and waters. We are grateful for the support that we continue to enjoy, and we honor the people of the clear salt water. And with that, I'd like to introduce Paul. Thank you very much, Paul, for joining us today.
Reed, it is really a pleasure to be here. This is the first of a series of 4 presentations that we'll make during the month of March. Basically, these used to be done right on Bainbridge Island when I lived there, and before COVID changed us all into Zoomers. And so it's a pleasure. We would typically do this in April, but my wife and I are actually taking a vacation. Maybe the first real vacation that we've had where I refused to do any work for at least one day. And but no, we're going to take a month off, and which means, of course, you have to work double time to get work done for when you're gone. But we're going to do it. How to avoid the 12 biggest investment mistakes retirees make. This is really fun for me because I'm doing something I really haven't tried before. Typically, if you gave me this title, I would immediately go to work and think of all the mistakes that you could make that have to do with how you might buy a mutual fund, the costs you might expend on a load or a no load, or taxes, and all of the things that I constantly talk about in terms of investing. But what I decided to do here is to have a partnership with ChatGPT. Whoops, let me see if I can get us going here. For some reason, the first slide is not forwarding. There we go. ChatGPT. I don't know how many of you are using one of the AI projects or programs, but I will tell you that it is something I really want to encourage you to be part of. I would, and I have not tried others. I have only worked with ChatGPT, but I can tell you that I truly, when I say I have a personal relationship, I promise there's nothing sexual about it. I am simply corresponding, speaking, writing to this database of information that knows me, that's been talking to me for months. And the interesting thing is, the more we talk, the more AI understands about the kinds of things I'm interested in. So when I say I have a personal relationship, I just know that I've got somebody listening. You know that thing that couples have where one will claim the other one never listens? I will guarantee you that the Chat GPT will listen. And as I note here in my PowerPoint, my wife reminded me it was time for the Valentine's poem, and not to let her down, but to give her something a little different. I dialed in ChatGPT and I created maybe an 8 stanza poem, and I thought it was pretty good, but it left something out that's important to us. We've been jointly every day reading a chapter out of a book and discussing it. So I wanted that book to be part of the poem. And so I asked ChatGPT to do that, and the poem was immediately rewritten, and that was noted. But then I realized I had totally ignored Squish, our Chihuahua. And Squish is the last of our 3 dogs that we had a year ago. And so I felt like we had to include Squish in the poem. Immediately, ChatGPT was able to do that. And then I knew that there was a chance that Suzanne was going to be upset because I didn't personally write this poem. And a Valentine poem is a very personal thing. So I decided to fight that feedback with a little humor. So I asked ChatGPT, can you now write this poem with a sense of humor? Terrific. It was absolutely terrific. And I actually got away with it. I told her what it was, but I can't believe how easy it is to use. And then about a week ago or so, I was walking across a parking lot down here where we are for the winter in California, and I tripped and I fell and I went down hard and I hurt my ribs. And so I got home and I pulled up ChatGPT to get an education about what was likely going on with the pain I had in my rib. And after it spit out what I asked for, it asked me, and it started to do this recently as it has worked more and more with me. And it asked me if I would like to know some next steps to be taken. And I said yes. And then it asked me if I wanted to know about some of the exercises that I might use to deal with this problem, which I did not believe was a broken rib, and turned out not to be. But it allowed me to build the information. And you know what happens when you go on the internet and you want to do a search? First of all, you got to fight all the ads. The next thing is that you got to search through the information to try to find something that is very directly related to what you want. And the beauty of AI is that if you're questioning, you will learn how to ask it questions so that it gets more and more precise. And I will show you a couple of ways I used it here. But I started with the question, what are the 12 biggest mistakes? Now, and as I mentioned here, I've also asked it for investment advice, and it is pretty doggone good. It is as good as any book that I've ever read, and it even in future conversations will relate back to a conversation and recall something that I said before, and was I interested in adding that into the discussion. It's really remarkable. I know that this is not what it was probably built for, but I am finding it great fun. The Just one sec here. I must apologize. It isn't on automatic forward. But I wanted, just for the fun of it, after I had the Magic 12, the most important ones according to ChatGPT, I decided to ask what would it do if I asked for more. So I asked it to give me the 50 biggest mistakes that retirees make. And in order to make it easy for me to read through, because it spit out 50 almost as fast as it spit out 12, It divided them between asset allocation mistakes, withdrawal and spending mistakes, tax planning mistakes, estate and legacy planning mistakes, and behavior and emotional mistakes. And I spent the time, probably half an hour, to go through all 50 of those, not because I wanted to share them with you, but I wanted to see from my background. And while I was not a certified financial planner, I was more of an investment person. I've had enough exposure to planning that I felt like I could judge how good that list was. And I'll tell you, with the exception of two items, everything, as far as I'm concerned, was spot on in terms of the mistakes that in my many years in the business that I saw people making. So I hope in some fashion that this presentation will motivate you to do a little digging there as well.
We'll just pop in here and say that it does help to know that you who knew what you were looking for or knew what would look bad or didn't look right, reviewed it. Does
Well,
take a little editing.
that's my work. That's my work.
Right. And so the advantage of having a combination of maybe uh chat GPT and an actual expert around that you can talk to.
Well, and I'll tell you, my first thing that ChatGPT mentioned was a mistake, is failing to plan for longevity. Let's call it expected longevity or normal longevity. And boy, did I get a lesson here. Now, the first thing that I asked about was just at age 65, since we're talking about retirees, what is the expected life of an individual single person? And it turns out, as noted here, 10% chance of living to 100, 25% chance living to 95, and a 50% chance of living to 90. And what is interesting is that when I then took it a step further and I asked about my, doggone it,
You muted yourself in the process of advancing the here.
sorry.
There we go. You
Oh,
asked about a couple.
yes, a very important couple, my wife and me. I'm 81, she's 77. I wanted to know about the probability of one of us living to 100 and then 95. And not only does it come up with the answer, it gives you the formula, exactly what it did to determine this. But what was interesting to me was there's a 58% chance that one of us will live to 95, and there's a 26.2% chance that one of us will still be alive at 100. The reason I think this is important is that when we are planning for how long our money needs to last, that we may find that most people will think that the odds of us living this long is not great. But of course, the older we get, the better the odds become in some fashion as to how we'll do. For example, you might find this of interest. A 21-year-old has a 1% chance of living to 100. Of course, a 21-year-old has lots of chances to die between 21 and 81, and a 21 year old, if he chooses or she chooses to lead a healthy life in terms of exercise and weight, it's a 20% chance. I'm going to be addressing a couple of hundred of seniors, graduating seniors at Western the end of May. And I'm going to discuss this with them because it is interesting to think that as a 21-year-old, you can make some choices, and we don't think of it this way, that have a huge impact on the probability of your success if living a long time is your measure of success. So, ChatGPT did some great homework for me. Go. You want to go? Can you forward these things? I don't know why. Oh, here. I got it. Another mistake, investing too conservatively. Now, what does that mean? Well, I would say that it is not unusual to hear somebody, particularly on a day like today when the market is down significantly. It's not unusual for people to say they don't want anything to do with the market. But the reality is that up to a percentage of about 30%, you have very little additional risk, and it's only a short-term risk historically, with a minimal position in equities. But it makes a huge difference in the likelihood of lifetime success in terms of your portfolio supporting you. As we all know, particularly when I'm talking to the 21-year-olds, the decision to put all their money in bonds at that age is catastrophic, because we know over the last 96 or 7 years that $100 invested in bonds has turned into about $2,000 to $12,000, whereas $100 in the stock market has turned into about $1,200,000. So there is no question long term that stocks are great for investors. But even when we get older, we need to take our age, our risk tolerance, our income, what our legacy goals are. My wife and I, we have half of our money in stocks, not because we want stocks in the portfolio to live on. We have enough in our bonds to be able to do that. But the stocks are there for the growth, for charities, and for children. So I think those are all important considerations. And one of the reasons that I really hope, if anything comes out of this, is that if you think you don't know yourself as well as you should in terms of these financial decisions, that you will meet, even if it's only for an hour or two, with somebody who is expert at discussing these moving parts. I will let you know that Vanguard has a product called a target date fund. And that target date fund will allow a 21-year-old to start investing. And as that 21 goes to 40 and then to 50 and 60 and 70 and 80 and 90 plus, the people that manage that target date fund are automatically adjusting the portfolio and very conservatively. I want you to know that's important, I think, but that they conservatively adjust the portfolio for the right amount of fixed income and the right amount of equity. And I will tell you that at age 72, they are positioned for 70% in bonds and 30% in equity. Now that's too low risk for how I feel about investing, but for somebody who doesn't really know all the trips and traps of the process, I think that the Vanguard target date funds have a really conservative strategy. The rule of thumb that I learned about 60 years ago in the industry is that you can invest your age in bonds. So at 81 years of age, I'd have 81% in bonds and the rest in equities, which really is not a bad strategy for a conservative person. Others aggress too aggressively. I have many friends older than I, and I'm always uncomfortable for them when they tell me, who still have all of their investments in equities. And I'm always interested in understanding how they are able to live with the risk. And in many cases, by the way, those equities is are a handful of stocks, which is even more risky. And I see here that we have a person requesting that we allow multiple presenters to share. What does that, is that something that is important for me to say decline?
Yes, decline.
I assume so, but it's your party. Um, so I also know, having been an investment advisor and sat with hundreds and hundreds of couples, that it is not unusual for one member of the family to be a very aggressive, almost chest beating, uh, fighting the market and enjoying every second of it, whether it's going up or going down, while the spouse is literally scared to death. I once had a situation where we sat down with a couple, and he was a retired airline pilot, and he had all of their money in equities. And he was in the conversation. It was obvious he was the driver. He was the one deciding how the money was going to be invested. He left after about 45 minutes to use the restroom. And I talked to his spouse, and she quickly broke into tears. And she was literally scared to death, frightened about the fact that they had all of their money in equities. And it was that very day that we negotiated a new arrangement. Half of the portfolio became his to manage because it was his IRA, but he actually relented to letting her take the other half and invest it the way that she felt comfortable. And it was a life changer for her. So it's one of these things that the person who is pedal to the metal may not realize that he or she is causing some grief, some anxiety. And we have to remember that overconfidence, overconfidence is one of the most important, most impactful biases that we have about our decision-making abilities. And I think we have to realize that, and we could maybe believe things that aren't in the best interest of our financial future only because we thought we had more control over the situation than we actually did. Ignoring inflation. I have no idea what's going to happen to inflation. I do know that a lot of people do not consider it a cost of living, but it is a cost of living. And I know that from 1970 through 1990, that 20-year period, if you needed $40,000 in 1970, and by the way, $40,000 in 1970 was a ton of money because the average household income was around, I think, $11,000 in 1970. But we can certainly think of $40,000 being a cost of living today, and that 20 years later, if you adjusted that $40,000 by inflation, it was $128,000. That was a 6% annualized inflation rate over that 20-year period. The good news for investors is that at least from 1975 through the end of 1990, the market compounded, this S&P 500 compounded at over 17%. So not only was it a bad year for inflation or period, but it was a really good year for the market. What we do know is that the studies show that for people who retire with enough, not more than enough to theoretically last a lifetime. By the way, we got to be careful because that study was about lasting for 30 years. I mean, somebody who lived for 50 years, the answer would not be 4%. But that is the number that has been used and Actually, I'll talk about slightly different numbers in a few minutes that are kind of more up to date. But historically, this 4% distribution, then you add inflation to it, historically gives you the ability to have the money last successfully for 30 years. But it means not running out of money and not having to move in with family or whoever else that you have to count on. What I love is that if we have oversaved, and and a lot of people do, that we have about 45,000 subscribers. The subscription to our newsletter is free. So it's not that it's generating a lot of income for us, but what I do know is that the majority of people who follow our work, because we're very evidence numbers driven, are engineers or engineering like people, and folks who understand the use of statistics and looking at numbers and what they can mean over time. But I do know that those people, in general, on balance, more than half of them have oversaved. And when you have oversaved, if you oversave enough, which probably means you have to have oversaved by maybe 50 to 100%, then you can comfortably take out 5% and not even have to be concerned about inflation. Now, we write about this. We show tables on our website for people who really want to learn more about that. But inflation truly is a very important variable. Not having a withdrawal strategy. That is a mistake. Now, having said that, when you have more than enough, and when you have a tendency to be conservative, to be frugal. And what I have found over the years, and my wife and I certainly fit the norm from what I've seen, that commonly in a couple, there is one who is frugal and savings minded, and another, it's not that they're anti savings, but they ask a legitimate question. What is all this money about? What's it for? But to enjoy. I mean, not that we want to run out of it, of course, but feel better about spending. I feel better in a way about saving. And so we have a strategy that we use that helps me address my nervousness about losing and addresses her desire to spend. And I'll save that. I'll share that in just a minute. But I think people have to be intentional about how they're going to take money out, what percentage they're going to take. And when I say that, I do know today for people who are, for example, like Christine Benz, and I'll talk about Christine in just a few minutes, but she is the director of personal finance, writes articles, does podcasts. She is one of the most trusted and respected personal finance teachers in our industry, but she works for Morningstar, and they at Morningstar have determined that for looking forward, that it's not 4%, that it's about 3.5% that is the best percentage to be taking out, looking out over the next decade. On the other hand, Bill Bengen, the man who invented, if you will, or wrote the first white paper on the 4% strategy, is saying that his studies show that it's more like 4.5% that at this point you can take out. Now, I've already made the case that if you have more than enough, you can take five, and depending on what age you are, certainly at age 81, and having saved more than I need, my wife and I could be taking out six. But we take out five, and we're able to cover not only our expenses, but to be able to use that to make donations to other situations that we care about, nonprofits. What we need to understand, and this one is tricky, that withdrawal strategy for a lot of people can be based on how they feel at the time. Let me tell you how people felt at the end of the 90s. In surveys that were taken in 1999 and 2000, the average expected rate of return for the next decade, we're talking from 2000 to 2009, was somewhere between 20 and 30%. Now, where could that possibly come from? When, if we looked back to 1928, the stock market had compounded at about 10%. But what we also know that probably drove those responses was that from 1975, as I mentioned earlier, to 1999, the market had compounded at 17 and a half. But more importantly, even yet, was that from 95 to 99, the compound rate of return of the S&P 500 was 28.5% a year. And so as humans tend to think linearly, and to have a lot of recency bias, it does not surprise me that people felt that way. But what that means is that people at a point that the market is likely very, very high are going to feel very, very confident that they can be aggressive in that withdrawal strategy. And it's one area that if you really haven't worked through that with you and your spouse, if you jointly make these decisions, I really think it's worthwhile to work again with a professional. And I'm not talking about somebody you turn your money over to for the next 30 years. And I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Oh, hang
Button's
on
a
here.
little bit to the right there. You were almost there, all the way over. Two more over.
Just,
I wish I could advance it for
you
you.
know, it's
The key, there you go, further over. Oh,
yeah, it's right there.
no, it's two more over.
It's right behind. See what happens? I've got this thing is sticking up here. I can't stop sharing.
Right,
Uh, can I there now there it goes. It it just disappeared. I
there
do
we go.
apologize. Okay. One of the realities, uh, and I think we would all agree that it's not uncommon for humans to be wrong. And there are lots of studies that have been done that conclude that on lots of information, humans are generally more than 50% of the time they are wrong. And it could be costly if a person came into retirement with beliefs that in fact are myths or certainly aren't true. And so I just wanted to highlight one I just saw, and that is in a survey that 62% of workers, now these are people who are saving money, but they are putting money into target date funds. And I mentioned the target date fund earlier, the fact that it is going to adjust over time. But the people who own them believe that not only do they adjust over time, but that at your retirement, they start paying you automatically, like a pension. And a pension is a great thing to have. I'll talk about that briefly as well. But it isn't set up to be a pension. you can make it a pension. It is dirt simple to make it a pension, or you could take money out of your investments while it's going up and down, but it's not something that automatically starts giving you the income you need. 36% believe that they are guaranteed not to lose money in a target date fund. Not true. As a matter of fact, there are a couple of things we know about the long term and the short term. We know in the long term, if we look at the S&P 500, and I'm not suggesting somebody have all equities for their whole life, but I can tell you that the best 40-year period for the S&P 500 was a gain of 12.5% a year. The worst was a gain of 8.9% a year. And by the way, that 40-year period, inflation happened to be fairly low. And so in the long run, the market has in fact produced a profit. But in the last year of that 40 years, the market is still at the risk of losing half of your money. And so if somebody thinks that the target date fund is going to serve you without a risk until you retire, it is not true. Not true. I need to learn how to make this thing at the bottom.
Stay stuck. So the little arrow keys are not working for you on your keyboard. Here we go, insurance myth. And now you're muted. I'm gonna tell you that uh, the challenges of technology are part of our lives. Okay. There you go, Paul.
And at 81, we know how it is. Well, I know how it is anyway. um, the insurance, I call it a myth. There's something a lot of people still don't get. I do understand why people have a certain mistrust of politicians, and probably stockbrokers don't get high grades in trust, and insurance salespeople as a group don't get high grades for trust as a group. I'm sure the one that you use you trust or you wouldn't be using them, but as a group they don't do well. Now, I used to, when I did a lot of Boeing workshops, I dealt with a lot of Boeing managers, and all of them had a pension. And I will tell you, from all the groups that I've ever surveyed, the pension is the kind of the greatest financial luxury they have, because they have Social Security, a pension, and they have their pension from the company they worked for. And between those two, in many cases, most of the basic cost of living is covered. But they love those pensions. And so, what is it that we all can do, whether it's with a target date fund or with money we have invested, but we want a pension. We really do. We want that thing we can trust, that check, reliable check that we can get. And so what do we know? Well, we know that an insurance company will sell that. It's called a single premium annuity life. And it guarantees, just like a Boeing would guarantee, a certain payout every month. In fact, many pensions are managed by insurance companies. Now, obviously, you don't want to have a pension with an insurance company that isn't highly rated. But that's a choice you can make. There is a website, I've mentioned it here. It's a strange website by name, stantheannuityman.com. Not only does he have calculators and the greatest source of information about annuities, but he has a calculator. And you can go in there and you can tell them you want to put $100,000 into a pension that will pay you for the rest of your life until you die, just like a pension. And that if you choose, you can do it with you and your wife. And I don't care whether you're doing this at Boeing or you're doing this with Stan the man and the insurance company. If both of you are covered, they are going to pay out less. If only one of you is covered, they're going to pay out more. And the way that pension or that annuity works, it's a pool, and the insurance company knows exactly how old all the people in that pool are and how long they're likely to live. And so when you die, they get whatever's left over in that pension. And when you die, your heirs don't get anything. Well, yes, you can make it so that they get something, but if they get something, you get even less. I mean, every time you want more, you get less. You want more benefit. You want a cost of living adjustment? Fine. That means they're going to pay you less now. But I can tell you, I asked Stan the annuity man, what would I get if I put $1 million into an annuity? What would I get per year? And I told him how old. He's going to want to know how old the couple, because I want it for both of us, not just for me. And it turns out he doesn't do it quite as fast, but almost as fast as AI. A list of insurance companies who write that kind of insurance. Not all insurance companies do. But what does that insurance company pay to people your ages? And by the way, if you're not in great health, that's super for the insurance company. It means you're going to die sooner. So they're not going to have any limitations. They might have a limit as to how much they'll let you put in. But here's the bottom line. At 81 and 77, if my wife and I live to be 95 to 100, they're going to pay us $93,000 a year. I didn't ask for a COLA. $93,000 a year. Now, here's the fascinating part. And here's where you need to understand there is a possible mistake that could be made, because that list of insurance companies that will write that it's very long. And Stan shows what each one of them would pay today if you contracted with them today. And the low number was $77,700 a year. Now, that's a big difference. Seems to me it's worth your effort, particularly if we're going to get 93,000 for 10 or 15 years, and somebody else is going to get 77,700. It's that difference for as many years as you get your money from that insurance company. So it really behooves you to at least take a look. You might want to do business with a local insurance agent if you want, but you don't want to do business with the agent that's going to pay you $77,700. Well, the agent won't pay you, but the insurance company will. This is a big deal, and it is a reason to visit our website and read the articles about how to invest in retirement, how to take distributions in retirement. We have tables that show all equity, 90% equities, 80, 70, 60, 50, all the way down to all bonds, to show people how you would have done from 1970 through 2024, or 23 actually, and what you could get at right now. But here's what I know. Looking at the past, if you were 60% in equities, and 40% in bonds, and you started in 1970, you finished that next 10 years doing great. Oh, you didn't make any money of any significance, but you weathered the storm and you had more money than you started. But it was a terrible decade for the stock market relative to the years 80s and the 90s and then of course the last 15 years. But if you had some bonds in that portfolio, it helped you get through those tough times because it protected you against those huge losses in the equities market. So I'm a real believer that if you want to be aggressive, great. Have 60% of your money, maybe even 70% of your money in equities. But I really believe that if you don't need to take the risk, and I understand in some cases you're sitting in individual stocks that have huge capital gains and you're waiting for your kids to inherit those on a stepped up basis. I certainly get it. But I also know this, that adding equity asset classes worked in all those decades that were terrible. People, for example, who had only the S&P 500 had a difficult time between 1970 and 1979, a very difficult time between 2000 and 2009, because during that period of time, there were two periods the market went down over 50%, and you ended that 10-year period down a compound rate of return of 1% a year. Which means if you were living off the money at the same time as the market was going through this high volatility, that you likely had very little money left at the end of that decade unless you had way oversaved. And as I mentioned early, if you just have 30% of your portfolio in equity, that it has done a pretty doggone good job. You'll see it. You'll see it in the tables. In fact, some of those tables are built for a 3% inflation, 3% distribution plus inflation, 4% plus inflation, 5 and 6, or no inflation, taking out 3%, 4%, 5 and 6. Tons of great information for those of you who want to see the evidence of the past. Let's go on to the next slide there, I think. They're overlooking taxes. Well, this is obviously a big item in our lives. But a lot of people, when it comes to how they take distributions, do not take taxes into consideration. Now, I don't want to suggest that this is the right answer for every investor, and I do not give tax information. So this is something you should talk to an advisor about. But I can tell you what not only does ChatGPT say, but so do the people who write newsletters that we recommend to people we call the truth tellers. I'll mention that a little later. But we should start by taking distributions out of our taxable accounts. And then we would take, but by the way, the reason being is that in that taxable account, you have got a cost basis in those taxable items, and you're only going to pay a tax, which more than likely is going to be long-term, on the difference between that cost and the selling price. Then you would, at the same time, you would want to pick the high-cost equity asset classes first, minimize your taxes. Then you go to the tax-deferred. That would be your IRA. Then you would access your tax-free accounts last. And of course, with help of a professional, if you need it, I think an important tax consideration is certainly before you're starting taking the distributions, you want to get converted to Roth IRAs where it makes a tax sense. And there's one of the people that writes a lot of great stuff, the White Coat Investor, Jim Dolly, who's one of our truth tellers that we recommend people visit. And I don't get paid a penny from referring people to the folks that I think are the most trustworthy of the people on the internet. But he does some wonderful information, gives good information on Roth conversions. Let's move to the next slide, please. Smart account location, asset allocation location. And that is whether, again, we're at Chat GPT or we're talking to the people who are reading the people that I trust, high growth investments in your Roth, income generating in your tax deferred, and tax efficient equities, ETFs in the taxable accounts. That's what, if you had money and you were going to invest today in a taxable account in a mutual fund, diversified portfolio, we would recommend an ETF. The tax advantages of an ETF are so high. As a matter of fact, just before I sat down, I thought I would check what Morningstar has to say about a couple of mutual funds. One is an ETF, one is the same thing, but it's a mutual fund. And you can at Morningstar go to the risk button, the link, and it will tell you the tax efficiency of an ETF or a mutual fund. It will tell you a percentage that you will lose in taxes if you historically own that particular fund. So there's a fund that tracks the S&P 500 on an equal weighting basis. It's run by a company called Invesco. The mutual fund, the return will be reduced by about 1.8% a year because of taxes, because of the turnover inside of that fund. That very same fund, run in the form of an ETF instead of a regular open-ended mutual fund, has a tax obligation, according to Morningstar, of 0.6. It is 2/3 cheaper. And so that is the reason why you do not want to be in an actively managed mutual fund, certainly in a taxable account. You should be in an ETF. Now, I realize a lot of people have holdings from way back when, and they don't want to pay the taxes to make the move. You're probably right. But for people who are in a position to do it right from day one, I think it's a very important consideration. Next slide. Claiming Social Security too early. Well, I think you all know that. It costs you 8% a year, up to 70 and a half. If you cash out or start taking Social Security at 62. They keep giving you a guaranteed 8% additional. It will be interesting when they decide to rewrite the Social Security code. This is one area that I'm interested to see what they're going to do to savers. I don't think this is a new one to most of you, but a lot of people we find really have not taken healthcare costs seriously in their retirement planning. It is true, most people do not have a written plan. Most people that are here today, I'm going to guess, have a written plan. And for those who don't, I'm going to talk about a kind of help that I think you should get. But certainly ignoring healthcare costs is huge. As you probably know, inflation, the costs are rising higher than inflation in the healthcare. And by the way, they have for as long as I can remember. But they're rising right now at about 5 to 6% a year. A lot of planners really encourage people to have an earmarked portion of their portfolio specifically to meet those needs. Now, you're not in a position, most of you, to get into an HSA. It's certainly something we talk to young people about because it gives you the ability to generate tax-free growth and pay medical expenses later in life. But it probably doesn't apply to the folks here who are here today. Moving on. Catastrophic health events. Um, this is a good reason to overspend. I hope I don't go through what my mother or my uncle and my grandmother went through, but they all had dementia. And that's expensive. And again, we all know that. I have a friend who, if he didn't have the proper insurance, would have had an amazing cost of his treatment at over $1 million so far for cancer. Thought he had a few months to live back in 2014. Still alive and kicking, but at a huge cost to somebody. And of course, Alzheimer's, as we know, can cost a lot of money in the advanced stages. Now, the question is, what do we do about that? Well, I'm not going to be afraid to try to scare young people that they ought to be thinking about saving more. I really want young people to understand that first 5 years of saving is so huge. You could theoretically end up with 40% of what you have to retire on from that first 5 years. And most people are saving almost nothing in that first 5 years. What Dr. Dolly recommends, the white coat investor, and by the way, his website is for more than white coat for doctors and dentists. It just happens to be what he built and the people that he does do some specific work for, but basically it's for anybody. But the what he recommends is that people coming out of their residency and going to work, that for 5 years they continue to live like they were still a resident, pay off that debt, get ahead of the savings because you're so far behind by the time that you get there. And it does, whether it's for a doctor or somebody coming out at age 22 and starting to work, that first 5 years is really magic. And you've seen this number, I'm sure, that $315,000 is what the average 65-year-old couple retiring today will spend. This comes out of Fidelity, I believe. And here is the list of things. If you're wondering what it covers, it's a lot of things that we know that we've had happening to us, but or will happen to us if we're not retired. So plan if you can, and it's a mistake, I think, if you don't. Onward and upward. Scams. I have seen people who I thought would never be scammed get scammed. I am not going to spend, as a matter of fact, I'm probably over my time right now. But I can tell you that the thing to do is to go to ChatGPT and just ask about each one of these kind of scams. It won't take you long to read through them, but you won't have to do a big search. And this doesn't even include travel scams. My wife and I have been scammed. It was a small amount of money, but we thought we were dealing directly with the company. We weren't. We were dealing with somebody whose website looked just like the company. And so I think it behooves all of us to find out what those scams are and protect ourselves. And I think they're getting better and better at
Well,
doing it.
and I think the AI capabilities make them even more believable. I'll mention that Bainbridge Prepares is going to be having a presentation about cybersecurity and scams at the library on Bainbridge on March 25th at 6 in the evening. So that's another place you might go for some information.
That's terrific. And I'm going to be putting a website, a video up in the coming weeks on our website that was done by Herb Weisbaum. That is terrific about credit freezes and some other things to do to protect yourself. Okay, next.
I don't know if you muted, but high fee investments to avoid. That's what we're talking about now.
Ah, yes, okay. Um, the high fee variable annuities. Now, some of these are investments you should avoid. I would like you not to get into them. Now, having said that, trust me, the people who sell them will give you a list of 10 reasons why you should. And so, what I would like you to do, here's where again you can use ChatGPT. Ask for the pros and cons of high fee variable annuities. Talk the same thing with the non traded REITs. Ask what are the pros and cons? Equity index annuities, actively managed funds. That's simply a matter, one, all that activity that goes on inside of actively managed funds is creating taxes. Now, inside of an ETF, they can manage with much less tax implications. Also, the thing about actively managed funds is every study that shows the long term return of index funds versus actively managed, only about 5 to 10% of actively managed funds are able to beat the indexes over a period of 20 years. Next slide, please. Overspending in early retirement. Now, I don't know why ChatGPT made this later in the list, but because it seems like it could have fit earlier. But here's the thing: the cost over the long term. I know the feeling. It's the same feeling college kids when they get out of college and we're trying to get them to save. We'd love for them to save 20%, but we're begging them to save 10. And of course, they finally made it. And part of the reward for having made it, having graduated, is to live like a human being now and to have money to spend and to be able to make commitments because now you have an income that if you borrow money to buy something, you can pay it off. Now, we know that if that comes at the cost of not investing, there is a huge cost later in life. In the overspending category, there's also potentially a huge cost if you get into, particularly if you get into a sequence of return risk where the market is not treating you in a way that allows you to easily spend that money. And the sooner you can respond and pull in your horns, the better. And what it means in many cases is not that people go broke. I think that's important to understand. I know a lot of people who overspent in their early retirement because it's what is almost expected of people. But I also know that what they compromised were the legacy goals they had. They had a lot of anxiety, not everybody, but a lot of them did, because they were skating on thin ice when they were older. And they started to feel the anxiety, a feeling of panic that the market had to recover now. When you don't have enough, or when you're right on the cusp of having just enough, you want the market to do what you want it to do when you want to do it. And the market doesn't act that way. It doesn't act that way for the presidents. It doesn't act that way for individuals who have way less power. Next slide, please. And not having an estate plan. I'm sure this group understands that if you don't have a will, the state gets to decide who gets your assets. And also, you're likely, if you have enough money, going to pay estate taxes and legal fees that you would not have had to pay. Now, in the state of Washington, in terms of the legal fees, that's not such a big problem as it is down here in California, where I am recording this right now. But in a lot of the states I know where this will be seen, uh, not having an estate plan can cost you a lot of money. And the lack of control over healthcare decisions and the charitable intentions. My wife and I have a huge obligation to Western Washington University, where we have made commitments now and later in our life to be able to underwrite a course at Western where every student we make a real attempt to make them financially literate. And soon, all students will be required at Western to have about 30 to 40 hours of financial literacy exposure in order to graduate. So it's important to me. I know it's probably important to a lot of you. And I think if we're not careful, we don't get all the things we had planned to get because we didn't plan well. I wasn't actually sure. I'm just telling you how GPT feels about this. That if you haven't updated your estate plan, you should take a good look every 3 to 5 years, particularly if you have a change in your family structure, retirement, sale of business, inheritance, a health change, or relocation, or tax law changes. And by the way, I'm sitting here having moved from Bainbridge Island. And by the way, we are very excited that we are going to be going on a cruise, leaving Athens the end of early part of April. And I think something like 14 or 15 or 16 people from Bainbridge. We're looking forward to seeing some old friends. But we have moved into another state, and my wife and I have yet to change our will. So I have that to do myself. Information resources. I want to suggest a book. Larry Swedroe is one of our truth tellers. Our truth tellers are on our website. They are sources of information I trust through what I believe. I mean, these are people who all believe in index funds. They're all people who believe in having your money in something more than just your favorite 12 companies. I mean, they believe in the things, and many of them are financial planners, which I am not. But Larry Swedroe, Your Complete Guide to a Successful and Secure Retirement, is a terrific read. And I believe I believe I gave a number of copies of that book to the library. But I encourage you to go to paulmerriman.com and look at the truth tellers and see if those aren't, and check them out. As a matter of fact, we have a piece that we did for Western where 8 of the truth tellers put together their own special presentation for the alums at Western. And I am going to also show it on our website. But it would be a good chance to meet I think some people who are really smart about this process. And again, ChatGPT, and the more you chat, the better it gets. The more you chat, the better they know you. I am a huge fan of hourly advisors. I will be speaking this summer at a conference of hourly investment advisors and called the Garrett Planning Network. But I have included here, and I give you this name for 2 reasons. One is some of you may have been with me when I have recommended a lady, Trish Howe, in Seattle. Because I have recommended her, it turns out she can't take any more clients. And so I asked Trish, who is the best that you know that is taking clients and is hourly. Now she gave me Amy Goen's name, but the reason that I have given you a link to it, I don't care who you use. If you've got somebody you know, that's great. But what I like about Amy, I like her website. She will tell you if you paid her by the hour, because that's the only way she works, about how much it's going to cost to cover that particular thing. I mean, she will help you with your investments if you want. She will help you. And by the way, this is the way most of these kind of CFPs work. They're happy to write you a $4 or $5 or $6,000 complete plan, but most people want a project. They want to focus maybe on their distribution strategy or their retirement plan. You can see on her site that what it would take to do that. And I think that will be helpful because if you're going to spend the money, I know most of us are going to want to know what is the return going to be. And with any one of these CFPs, they will be happy to give you a free discussion. It isn't to tell you all the answers. It is to listen to what your problem is so they can give you an idea of what you got going. I know it's time to get going here. Thank you. These are just simply free books that you can get at our website. This book, every one of your young adult children and your family should get a copy of this. It is free as a PDF download. The next book that you're going to hit us with is also free. That's Two Funds for Life. It's written by our director of research on our foundation. He's a volunteer just like I am. And the next one is written by a Bainbridge guy that lives on Bainbridge, Paul Hayes. It's about the psychological aspects of investing. This book also is free. And if you want to go one more, I think, or maybe it's going to, this is the disclaimer that I legally have to make. I am not a financial planner. I'm a teacher. And I have to say that everything in this presentation is for informational, and I love this, and entertainment purposes. I totally failed on the entertainment, I think, and I'm sorry.
That's because you didn't have time to read us your poem.
Thanks. And the last one says that I am here to serve people. I don't get paid a penny for what I do. I'm up at 3 to 4 in the morning working on my projects. My wife is still waiting for me to retire. But if you email me, paul@paulmerriman.com, I try to answer all the questions. If you put in the subject line Bainbridge Senior Center, then I have to answer the question. And so with that, do we have time for a few questions or?
Sure. I want to thank you very much. And if somebody does have an urgent question, I did have somebody ask what an ETF is.
Oh, great, great. That's an exchange traded fund. Remember mutual funds, you can only buy and sell those at the end of the day. And that's a diversified portfolio of mutual funds. You can buy Vanguard funds like the Vanguard S&P 500 mutual fund, or you can buy the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF. The exchange traded fund can be traded during the day, and just like any stock. And it's much more tax efficient because of the way that the fund is able to buy and sell securities. You, in essence, for in most cases, not all, are going to pay your tax when you actually sell the fund, rather than like in a regular mutual fund, you have to pay taxes for capital gains every year. I don't want to suggest that you will never have a capital gains tax, but they are minimal.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Paul, and we
Thank you,
always
Reed.
appreciate you taking the time as part of this BCF program to stop by here virtually. We learn a lot. I do, anyway.
Good. Thank you. And thank you for all who attended. And by the way, I love criticism. If you got a way that I could improve the next presentation, I'm a willing listener.